It's our world too. It's our world too. It's our dream too.
So, you know, I mean, how this whole thing kind of evolved for me, and I hate to use the word evolve because I don't believe in evolution. I believe in intervention, you know.
Yeah.
But it's how it kind of evolved for me is that I got really interested in the stuff that Richard Hoagland was doing, because the difference between his research and other people was that, you know, videos of UFOs, photos of UFOs, you're always going to have certain limitations. There's always Photoshop, there's always digital manipulation, there's always going to be questions. But with Hoagie's stuff, I felt like, you know, if we could get really good, honest pictures, we can actually prove out the hypothesis. So that to me felt like grounded, and it felt like solid stuff that I could work with. So I kind of got into the whole ancient artifacts on other planets. You know, I mean, I've written Ancient Aliens on the Moon, Ancient Aliens on Mars, and now the new book is Ancient Aliens on Mars 2, the second one, right? Like Sharknado, the second one. And Sharknado 2, the second one. You saw that the other day, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I that was what I was doing. And in the meantime, then these other things started happening. Giorgio helped me get on Ancient Aliens. They interviewed me. They apparently liked me. I got to do a lot more episodes of that show, talking about stuff that was more earthbound rather than stuff on Mars and the Moon. And then through a really bizarre process, I did a presentation in LA at the Bodhi Tree, the old Bodhi Tree bookstore, if you remember that.
Sorry to see it go.
Yeah, and did a presentation there with Sean David Morton on my birthday about 4 years ago. And somebody from Discovery was looking for people to put into this alien show they wanted to do on Discovery, and they saw the video, and they brought me and Sean out, and we both tried out, and I made it, and he didn't, and I ended up being like this skeptic for this show, Uncovering Aliens, which is the title we ultimately came up with. I wasn't ever wild about it, but this is the great part. The first title the network executives came up with, I kid you not, folks, Probed. Okay, that was what they were going to call the show, was Probed. And Maureen Ellsbury, my co-star, my co-star Maureen Ellsbury said, if you call it that, people are going to look at my IMDb profile and think I did porn. So you're not calling it that. So that went away really quick. But
incredible.
It was really different because, you know, rather than looking at pictures and writing these long, detailed dissertations on why this can't be a natural object and why it's artificial, I'm actually out there meeting people that have had experiences with extraterrestrials, or what they believe are extraterrestrials. And we met several people that have had really, you know, awful experiences, and several people that had pretty good experiences, but different. And we had this conflict. We had Stephen Jones and Daryl Sims, the alien hunter, were two of my other co-stars. And, you know, Daryl's like, the aliens are evil, and Stephen's, the aliens are here to help us with the next step in our evolution. And, you know, not to mock Stephen, but, you know, and I'm like, I don't remember that we asked them to help us evolve to something else. Do you remember that? But I would meet these people, and, you know, I'm supposed to be the skeptic on the show, which I am. I'm a genuine skeptic. Most people that call themselves skeptics are actually debunkers.
Sure.
And the difference is, of course, debunkers do not believe, and they will do anything to make sure the general public doesn't believe.
Sure.
And a skeptic is somebody who just keeps asking questions until they make up their mind about it. And so I'm skeptical of what I hear. But we're talking to these people, especially this one very vulnerable young woman, and she's talking about her experiences, you know, and I'm sitting there listening to this, and I'm realizing this woman is not crazy, and yet she has these stories of these alien beings, you know, coming through her walls, all the classic stuff you hear about, doing things to her that she doesn't agree to. And I started to think of it in terms of, I've got to find some proof to back up her story so that she can know that she's not crazy, because I'm pretty sure she's not crazy. So that was what I started doing. I started like digging for that information. Wow. And, you know, it was really an amazing experience. Wow. It changed my perspective because it was much more personal. It was a much more personal UFO thing than looking at pictures of the face on Mars and so forth. And, you know, there was one family, the Foggins case in Ohio, and they actually, their dad was getting abducted. The kids were getting bothered. They were all, you know, freaking out for no good reason. And, you know, they actually, one of the kids actually shot at a UFO. It came down into the woods behind their house. It was floating back there. He shot at it with a shotgun 2 or 3 times, and it finally left. And Daryl goes out there and he tests the area, and the background. And I said, "Where is it?" And they said, "It's over there." He walks over. He's got his Geiger counter, and the background radiation was 100 times higher where this thing had been than it was 25 feet away. So I'm like, "That's really interesting." And then they had a piece of metal, which they weren't sure if it was shot off or if it fell off a UFO, but there was a sighting where this thing dropped down, and we tested that metal, and it came back. The oxygen isotopic ratio of some of the elements came back as an aluminum alloy, which means it was manufactured metal. It was not naturally occurring metal, and it had non-terrestrial elements in it, meaning that there were some of the elements, strontium-84, strontium-88, that were not from the Earth. So how do you have an alloyed metal, a mixture of metals put together, which included ingredients from somewhere else, whether that was Mars or the Moon or Jupiter or whatever? And that's like proof. And I don't think there's any other UFO cases out there that have ever actually had that kind of established proof. And since then, it's been tested twice more.
There's weird anomalies out there. We saw one years ago. Guy walked into my lecture. He looked very emaciated, tall, long fingers. There was a guy that was with me, an older gentleman who'd studied metaphysics since God before time, I think.
Yeah.
And he took one step back and he just said, "I don't like this guy." And I looked at him and I thought, this is very unusual looking. He had hair kind of like down like Jesus. And he looks like emaciated, and he just didn't look quite right and everything, And so I went over to him. It was very early on my lecturing kind of thing. I was very new to it, and so I didn't know that, at that time it was like, you're actually going to, ask me to come out here and speak and give me some money for this.
Yeah.
Because I was just starting to be somewhat of a personality and name in the field or whatever. And he walked over to me and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And he said, "I'm okay." And he just stared at me. And I asked him, "What's your name?" Right?
Yeah.
And he said, "My name is Gunthra Tozar Gunthryx." And I'd never heard anything like that before. What?
So you're German then,
and
right?
I said, "Yeah, so where are you from?" And he said, "Well, I'm in from what you would consider behind the Kanga system, behind the three novas. There is this district of stars and everything, and that's where I'm from." I thought he was going to tell me he was from Ohio or something. No, please don't do this to me. Right? But then that's when he said, "I want to show you something." And he pulled out literally this red stone. He put it in his hand, looked just like a ruby, and all of a sudden it literally illumined and glowed brilliantly. I mean, it was absolutely startling, where everybody took one step back and just gasped.
Yeah.
Stones aren't supposed to do
so.
that.
Right.
This is not, batteries, or this is not some special kind of trick. It glowed a very brilliant off his hand. I mean, it was jaw-dropping and everything. And he said, "I just wanted to show you that." And he put that in there. And we were like stunned, right?
Yeah, element 115. I mean, what was it?
My father was dying at the time. And I said, after the lecture was over, I'd gotten a little bit friendly with him. And I later asked him on the phone, as my father was dying from a very, very rare lung disease. And I said, "Do you do readings?" And he said, "Yes, I do readings." And I said, "Well, can I do a reading with you?" And he said, "Okay." So I went over to his house, and there were all these pictures that this little girl that lived in the house had drawn, and the woman, the mother, which were unrelated to him, of all these like different alien beings all over the walls of different kinds. Now that's very unusual for a 12-year-old or 10-year-old girl to draw aliens, right? But the story gets a lot more interesting. They left, I sat down, did a reading with him. And I said, "Listen, my dad's dying. I'm really concerned. Can you do a reading?" And he said, "Yes, let's do the reading and everything." So we sat down, and I assumed that he would talk to me during the reading or close his eyes, or I didn't know what kind of reading he was going to do. And so he closed his eyes. He had just like a piece of paper like this, and he had a pen like this, and he just laid his hands down on the piece of paper like this with the pen, and then he just closed his eyes, and then after a while, it just looked like he was nodding off. And I thought,
"Great.
I paid for this?"
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, his hand just went like that, and it went.
Oh, like automatic writing. Okay.
Yeah, like this.
Yeah.
And he just was, his eyes were closed and it was drawing like that, right? And then after only, wasn't very long, less than a minute, he put his pen down, he opened his eyes, and he said, "There's your reading." And I looked down and I saw 3 squiggly lines here, one in the middle and one in the bottom. And I go, "That's it?" And he goes, "That's it." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, this is his lungs, this is his kidneys, and this is his heart. You asked me to do a reading on his condition. So that's it. There's a reading. Go ahead and take that. You take that to a nurse or something,
Right.
and she'll help you with that."
Right.
And I looked, I said, "Okay." So I left, and I showed it to a head nurse that was a nurse in San Jose, California, at the campus there, and she was the head of the nursing division of radiology and doing x-rays and everything. And I said, "Listen," I said, "have you ever, can you tell me if this is worth anything, or is this anything?" And she looked at it and she said, "Wow." She says, "It's a perfect electrocardiogram." She says, "It even includes the systolic and the diastolic. Very nice." She says, "This is his lungs. His lungs have palpitations in them. Obviously, we have a lung problem here. This is his kidneys. His kidneys are very, very toxic, and they are weakening very, very fast. And this is his heart. His heart shows many palpitations and everything." And she said, where did you get this? Looks like this doesn't look like it was done on a machine." I said, "Well, this guy did it. He did it by hand." She said, "He did it by hand?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "He did it by hand?" I said, "He did it with his eyes closed." And she goes, "I've never seen anything like this before." What?
That's brilliant.
And that's a true story. And that showed you that I think aliens walk amongst us. I think they are here in strange forms. Now, later on I learned that he was kind of a walk-in. In fact, the person that I met occupying the body 3 or 4 or 5 weeks later was not the same person. I later learned that this was a vehicle that they revived. I know it sounds incredible, but this person had died for 3 days.
Okay,
And
so
the body-
seriously, this is a zombie alien?
This is, I don't, you can call it what you
Zombie
want.
alien apocalypse?
They
Wow.
raised him from the dead, and a different spirit of ET entity was occupying the
You
vehicle.
do realize what an awesome idea that is for a movie on sci-fi, and of course somebody's going to steal that idea now. But
Okay,
that's
so this treatment is by Mike Bara
Zombie
and Robert
Alien
Perala,
Apocalypse.
and this is Zombie Apocalypse.
he's going to do the story. I'm going to write up the
That's
screenplay.
right, and
We'll-
everything, and then we'll take it to my son at Lionsgate Film.
there we
It's
go.
that easy.
Yeah,
Now
that's
you have a hit.
that's an incredible story, but it's the kind of thing that you hear from people when you actually get out and talk to them, and you realize that so many people have had unusual experiences like your experience. It's your own unique experience, but there are so many people out there that have had these weird experiences, and you're right, they meet these strange beings,
There's anomalies.
Yeah.
There's in between.
If you just talk to people and get them to open up, I think 75-80% of people have had some weird paranormal kind of experience like that.
Sure, of course.
It's weird. It reminds me of my pet psychic who read my cat when I first got her, and I thought it was kind of a joke. I was going to blog about it. I got this pet psychic from Coast to Coast who'd been on a few times, and she did a reading with my cat, who I had just gotten as a companion for my other kitty that was getting older, and she said, well, she's really worried about her male kitten. She has not seen him since they were all captured, in the Long Beach Harbor area. And I was like, okay,
Right.
and because I was really weird because I knew that the cat I had adopted had 3 kittens, all female. And I was like, no, that's not right. She's only got 3 kittens. And she was like, no, she had a male kitten and she hasn't seen it. So I put it off. But then it kind of bothered me. And it kept bugging me. And about a week later, I called back the people I had adopted them from. And I said, did Aurora have a male kitten as well as female? And they said, yeah, there was a male kitten. And we nursed him and nursed him and nursed him and thought we had him back to health. And right before we let them all see each other again, he died. And I went, okay, so what that means is, look, a male kitten out of a litter of 4 cats, the odds are pretty good. There's going to be at least 1 male in there, right? But the thing is that what she knew was that they had been separated and had not been able to see each other for a couple of weeks after they'd been captured. And there's no way that the pet psychic lady, Denise Zach, by the way, could have known that unless the cat told her, because I didn't know that.
All right.
I had never asked that. I didn't know anything about it. They had never told me. You know, and the hair goes up, and it's the same kind of thing. It's
Wow.
like there's some other connection to everything that exists out there. And I totally believe your story. It's like that's awesome. I'd like to investigate the zombie alien if only the show had been renewed, which.
Well, you know, these stories
May or may
come
not.
from somewhere, and there's in-betweens.
Yeah.
There are unexplainables. You know, the dead is walking amongst us. There are walk-ins amongst us. There's ETs amongst us. And I think it's just taken all this whole community to try to figure out, you know, how does all this fit? How does all this work? There are so many people now making testimonies of this guy walks into a bar. And that starts that way. But this guy is not human. This is a different bar story.
He's got the black eyes.
Exactly.
Or he's got
This
something.
is a different bar story. I mean, we talked with Nick Redfern today and everything. We
Yeah.
talk about Men in Black and everything like that. I actually think I saw one of those and everything. I saw him on Santa Cruz. You know, a guy came walking down the street, walked right past me, pasty face, looked at me, and as soon as he went by, I didn't like the whole thing. He was dressed wrong. This is a weird vibe. This is strange. And I was so upset by it, I walked away from it quickly. But then I thought, you know what? I should take one more look back to see, you know, who was that? And I looked back, and there was no one there.
Totally. This brings me back to another story from Uncovering Aliens when we were shooting in South Carolina, and we were at a location where we were going to do this thing they call the Hub, and Maureen and I go out to just get some hot coffee because we're freezing. I mean, it was like that Arctic thing that happened, you know, and it was totally freezing. And I look across the parking lot, and I see this guy dressed exactly as a classic Man in Black, you know, with the wide-brimmed hat and the black jacket, and he's on a cell phone. He's not looking at us, and we're kind of walking, and I'm just keeping an eye on this guy, and then he stops and he puts the phone down and he just stares at us and just watches us as we walk away. And we kind of went around the corner, and I was like, that was really weird. And I went back to look, and he was gone. Same kind of thing. Yeah. But he was dressed exactly like a Man in Black. Now, he was far away. I couldn't really tell if he had the weird eyes, but he was very pale, black-brimmed hat, the black suit, like he was dressed out of the 50s. Yeah. You know, and so they are around, but what the hell they are, I really don't have any idea.
Yeah.
It's very strange stuff.
We're working on a case with a woman who's a Russian woman who lives in the Bay Area, whose son is in Poland, who does automatic writing. And the writing is absolutely astonishing. And she asked me to come over one day, and she knew me. I didn't know her. I went over and saw her, and I said, well, what's this all about? You know, and she said, well, I wanted you to help me decipher these writings. And it turned out she explained to me who her son was, Andre, who lives in Poland, Russian. And she showed me these drawings and everything. And I said, well, he's been doing this very often and everything? She says, he has rooms of manuscripts, the spiral binders, manuscripts. She says they come to him every day, at least once, sometimes twice a day, and they dictate to him for 45 minutes a day until he has a headache that comes afterwards, until he can't take any more. And then he stops and everything. And I looked at this writing, and it was absolutely astonishing. It was absolutely off the scale.
Like the Urantia book or something, you know.
Yeah,
Sounds
in fact,
well, he ought to publish all that stuff.
I've even got one with me. This is a little sample, you know, of the writing itself and everything. And this is what's been coming in left and right daily. Volumes of it. Now, it's reversed. When he writes it, it's reversed. This has already been reversed. We reversed it. But if you look carefully, there's T's and J's and F's, you know.
It looks like something from Lord of the Rings or something.
Yeah,
I mean,
know.
It's bizarre.
But it's coming in daily. Now, she says it's coming in from the Pleiades. And she's saying there are men and women like you and I who have benefited from greater time and greater knowledge, and they are transmitting this to him. I said, well, what would be the purpose, since we can't read it? Since we can't understand it, why bother with it? And I guess we're going to find out sooner or later, but it's an amazing case. And
I bet there's code breakers that could figure that out.
We're trying to work on that. Help me with that.
Yeah, I'd love to if I knew anybody.
There's a woman, there is also, she called me to her house, or she called me to her office, and when I met her, she told me that she had been taken out of her house by the ETs and had lived in the Pleiades for a period of about 5 days, and she drank from these different colored shakes. She said there were men and women like her that were there. She said they were very, very beautiful. It was a very peaceful place. And then finally they brought her back and they put her back into her body. And she woke up, and ever since that happening, since this call it abduction or a visitation or whatever, her son became activated and started writing stacks and volumes of this writing.
That's really interesting. I hear the Pleiades is really, really nice this time of year, so I think it'd be a good place to go.
It's a fabulous place to start.
It's our world too.